All right, we're top of the hour. Thank you for listening to our ambient, easy listening music. So I am the host, Will Morris, physician by training and the Chief Medical Information Officer here at Google Cloud, and welcome to the Healthcare Life Science Summer Camp. Let's flip to the next slide. We'll be talking, obviously, with some of the leading experts in the space around ambient listening, and I'll do the introductions. But before that, let's get into kind of the core camp rules, if you will. We will be recording this. Again, the idea is to share, disseminate, and partake in the elevation of knowledge around this space, and hopefully raise the level of awareness and engagement. Please, so you can pin your speakers. You don't want to look at me. I would recommend pinning Ian or Sarita. Just like camp, there's lots of bugs, so bear with us. The number one bugs, typically, since this is in a webinar format, is the dreaded "you're not on mute." So please make sure you mute yourself. Otherwise, the camp director will come and mute for you. We encourage question and answers. We don't want to make this a didactic lecture series. We really want to make the sharing of information. The less you hear from me, the better. So please ask questions, use the Q&A, and then we'll triage as such. If we don't get through everything, what we're going to be doing is trying to answer afterwards, and then part of the email blast afterwards will be the link to the recording, as well as any kind of remaining hanging chads, if you will. With that, let's get started and meet our esteemed speakers today. Joining with me is Ian Shakil. He's the founder of Augmedix. I would say is the OG of ambient listening. I believe 2012, 2011 is when Augmedix, busted out into the field of ambient speech, listening, and engagement for clinicians, and we'll be hearing a little bit about that. And then joined with us is one of our rock star customer engineers, Sarita Joshi, knows everything there is about AI, especially this brave new world of NLP, natural language processing, ASR, automated speech recognition, and this kind of weird thing called generative AI. And so we're going to hope to demystify or perhaps even confuse this emerging space, because it is quite cluttered. There's probably 40 or so companies that are floating right now in this space, and probably there's 2 startup companies after this conversation, so it's probably going to be 42. But we really hope to kind of demystify and kind of level set a level of understanding. So with that, and again, I think we can lose the slide background, so it's more personal and you're not staring at heads. But maybe Ian, I'd start with you. You've been in the space. Correct me if I was wrong. Around 2012. But take us back there. What problem were you trying to solve? And then kind of as you play out this current kind of exponential ride of interest in the space, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I did found this company more than a decade ago. I'm 100 on the inside. I have the battle scars. In fact, I founded Augmedix at Dolores Park, arguing with a bunch of Googlers in San Francisco. and we're still at it. If I were to show you our PowerPoints then and our deck today, the problem and the solution is very similar conceptually. We have decided to go after quite literally the biggest pain point in the lives of doctors and clinicians, and that's the fact that clinicians spend 2, 3, 4 hours a day typing on the computer, clicking the EHR, and not doing productive tasks and paying attention to the person in front of them, the patient. So way back in ancient times, we used technology with high ratios of Augmedix provisioned humans in the loop to make an ambient documentation experience possible for clinicians a decade ago. That means like a doctor and a patient could have a natural conversation, like we're having a natural conversation here and now, and they could just trust that in the background, that conversation is being structured into their record-keeping system, into their EHR, reclaiming hours a day and allowing that focus to be reclaimed. Again, in the early days, AI and other techniques were not where they are today, so we had to deploy humans in the loop in the background to make that magical experience possible. What's so cool about where we are today, though, is with the advances in AI, we're able to compress the ratio of humans in the loop in the background to make that ambient documentation experience possible. And more recently, we're able to, in many cases, zero it out. So that means there is no human in the loop in the background within our technology stack. The notes we produce are purely AI generated. And when that occurs, we like to say the human in the loop becomes the clinician or the doctor. So there's always a human in the loop. And as AI kind of has grown over the last decade, that human loop is increasingly the clinician and not some Augmedix operational staff. But that's kind of been the journey, and you're right. We were the first. Sometimes it's good or bad to be the first. And there seems to be a sort of a Cambrian explosion over the last couple of years, right? There's definitely more than 40, and we'll probably catalyze and inspire a few more through the course of this call to come and put their hat in the ring.
I love it. I think this is the first time I've heard Cambrian explosion and health IT. Although we probably are still in the Paleolithic time, but we digress. We're not going to. That's next summer camp. We'll be talking about geology and healthcare and the correlations. So tectonic plates. Sorry, I'm going to riff on this. Sarita. So from a computer science standpoint, what's that evolution? So right, there's voice to text, ASR, all of these things. Where is kind of the capabilities and where has the new features emerged and others have kind of died out? Is there a rubric or something that we should be thinking of as these capabilities become more powerful?
Mm-hmm. So how Ian explained, right? So I will take that context of a decade worth of business and why there is a need, and let's map it back to the technology. So from a science perspective, think about what we are talking. We are talking about conversational AI. We are talking about speech to text and information retrieval from a textual data. This is not net new. But the evolution of science or the state-of-the-art technology that has evolved over a period of time, wherein now we say we live in the era of large language models. So the way I see this is when we talk about conversational AI, when we talk about, say, a speech-to-text approach, now we are pushing the boundaries of technology. We are innovating in the space of healthcare. I will double click on healthcare because when Ian says, think about a doctor and a patient having a conversation just like us, that's where the nuances of medical entities kick in. So now where we are headed with this technology is leveraging something like a large language model with a very sophisticated reasoning that can simplify this journey that's has multiple pieces in the workflow from a computer science perspective, which is, hey, let's talk about ASR. We have different approaches to solve for ASR. Then we talk about, let's solve for natural language processing and entity extraction. Then we say, let's go on to the next phase of the puzzle, wherein now can we map the medical entities on top of that. The simplified version where the technology is headed and we are seeing some groundbreaking results is can a technology like large language model can solve for or simplify this approach so that we get better? So one is simplifying the approaches. The second is when we say we get better, it's the accuracy, because that's paramount when it comes to the medical entity extraction. So it has two pieces of the puzzle. One is listening, translating, writing it back to a text, and improvising the accuracy over a period of time. So what we are observing, and with that, I'll add a little bit of spill. I would mention a lot about the upcoming research paper or the manuscript that we are building. What we are seeing is using the power of large language models that are multimodal in nature, that are multilingual in nature. We are pushing the boundaries of these large language models to go beyond an accent, to go beyond a specific country. Say we started our manuscript on English, now we are headed to an African accent, and the results are consistent. We are seeing that with the word error rate is reducing over a period of time with the advancement that we are seeing, and we are getting at par benchmarks using the power of large language models. So that's where we are headed.
So, this is fascinating because I think about as clinicians and everyone back in the day, it was dictation. It was straight up just what I said. It was dictation, but context is king. And I think that's kind of invisible to a lot of people. Who's in front of me, what kind of physician I practice, the environment are actually important heuristics that shape that dialogue and change the weights. Ian, is that kind of bearing, true? Are you seeing kind of the clinical scenario? Hey, this is a cardiologist talking to the patient, so therefore I have a certain rubric that kind of flavors the ASR. Is that kind of that grounding what Sarita talks about? Is that kind of correct?
I think it is correct. For one, Sarita, you're on the money. The ASR has been evolving so quickly. Will, 3 years ago, I was constantly racking you on, ASR is not at this level. We need this word error rate improvement, this and that. Notice that I haven't been, troubling you with those questions anymore. ASR is increasingly a very much solved problem. What was on the frontier 3 years ago is now kind of forgotten table stakes today. Yeah. And now we're on to these more exciting topics of sort of unique accents, unique situations, large multi-team conversations. And what's so interesting, what Sarita is alluding to, is that even the boundary between what is the ASR segment and what is the LLM segment is starting to get blurry in a good way, which is allowing some of these advancements. But I think to your point, Will, there's a huge amount of need for specialization and by clinician customization, which is why you really need a vendor partner such as Augmedix to even be around. If you, as a health system, were just to kind of just take off the shelf ASR and off the shelf LLM, makes for great demos, can be kind of convincing for 10 minutes, but then you realize, this doesn't work for my Southeast region hospitalists that want it this way and this and that and the other. And that's where you really need someone like Augmedix to kind of be the bumper car and put in and dial in and maintaining QA, those sort of specializations and preferences using your ASR, LLM, and other AI tools.
So if I kind of replay that, like doing it once and showing a demo is kind of that's perfunctory table stakes. It's really doing it at scale and those variety of clinical practices. In your view, what is that most gnarly edge case? Because I've always heard like do innovation for the edge cases, because that's where you'll really kind of cut your teeth. What is that?
One of the things Augmedix likes to do is run into the fire, and the obstacle is the way. And we feel if we can tackle the hard, everything else kind of comes along for the ride. So one thing we here at Augmedix decided to do a couple of years ago in partnership with HCA was go into the emergency department, which is like quite honestly the hardest place you could ever imagine doing ambient documentation. And we figured with HCA, if you could nail that, the rest, we'll give you the rest. So let me tell you about the ED. I hope you haven't been there recently, but if you have, it's a bonkers place. There's oftentimes not even rooms. There's like curtains. There's noises. There's all kinds of screaming. There's no schedule to speak of. It's just constantly evolving. Clinicians are kind of futzing with their hands and using their hands in all kinds of ways. And you're kind of, unlike an ambulatory or primary care environment where you go in, you see your patient, you're done, let's get the note done. You may be in and out of that room multiple times, maybe over the course of hours.
Yeah.
So we've had to put in place ANSR and acoustical capabilities, hardware capabilities to survive in those noisy, crazy environments. UI, UX capabilities to allow a clinician to go in and out of a room multiple times, engage, disengage, Augmedix, and ultimately models behind all of that to stitch it all together and produce cogent notes with reevals. And our determination is if we can kind of tackle that most hard edge case, we can do anything and we'll be trusted at health systems.
No, I love certainly that timing piece, the ransom note, as we used to call it, is you kind of begin here and then 15 minutes later or an hour later you start here and there, and it's kind of this like amalgamation of stuff, and pulling it together in a cohesive single pane of view that kind of summarizes the patient. Other than time back, so everyone kind of throws around burnout, right? Oh my gosh, it's, and also, the patient experience, because the less screen time, the more I'm actually focused on the patient. How do you think about value back to a system, right? Because this solution is $1, whereas I'm not paying $1 today, although you could argue they're losing $1 because the doc is probably not documenting timely. But what do you think about like value creation in this space?
Yeah, as they like to tell us in healthcare, no money, no mission, right? So if we're not constantly aligning on strong ROI pillars to support Augmedix, it'll never be more than just a demo. So why do they buy? You named a big one there. Burnout and clinician satisfaction. Funny enough, 5 years ago, that wasn't really taken very seriously. That was kind of like what they like to say, CFO like to say, a soft green dollar.
Yeah.
But in the middle of the pandemic, CFOs started to realize, wow, I actually do need to attract and retain clinicians. That's kind of more like a hard green dollar these days. So now we get credit for burnout alleviation and clinician satisfaction, but still we have to offer more value propositions. So in many of our specialties, the key justification is what we like to call documentation quality.
Yeah. So
not only are we kind of giving the clinicians their quality of life back and help, let doctors be doctors, as we like to say. The notes we generate are quite interestingly much better than the notes the clinicians were doing in the middle of the night in their prior status quo. And a better note is a more comprehensive note. It's concluded faster and it allows for optimized billing and coding, which really helps to support the cost of Augmedix and related deployments. So I would say that's another big ROI justification point. Another one is more volume or throughput. It's not appropriate in every specialty, but in certain specialties and settings, if you save a clinician 2 or 3 hours a day, a portion of that pizza pie of time saving can go back to seeing 1 or 2 more patients a day. And when that happens, you get an overwhelming ROI pop as well. There are other things we're doing as well around certain type of nudges and defaulting the note in certain ways to kind of further support ROI. But usually those first 3 things I mentioned are enough to get a health system to yes.
And Sarita, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot from a tech standpoint. So we're putting this through a large language model, and that language model is not only kind of writing a textual, I'd say, unstructured blob, but behind the scenes, it's got a vector or some sort of embedding model representation. Why do we kind of go from this mathematical model of some really interesting rich data where it's got concepts of linked entities and stuff that behind the scenes, like the metadata, but yet it just cranks out a blob, and then we have to go take that blob and parse it and do computer-assisted coding and other things. It seems like we go from analog, like digital to analog to digital to fax machine to carrier pigeon. Where do you see also kind of, the interaction of speech, the guidance, the bumper bowling, but also the processing actually help think about capturing entities for a record, and then trapping those so you can drive research, quality, decision support, all of those things, as opposed to kind of just with the objective of just creating a blob of text?
Yeah, so great one. So I'll try to attempt it by emphasizing why the technology underpinning plus a partnership with partners like Augmedix together can actually give us that solution. Because what Ian was alluding towards is it's not just fitting in, say, an ASR or an LLM that can give us a solution at scale, but the nut bolts, as you described through this whole journey, where does it fit in and help us build a framework that is scalable, also a framework that helps us allow you to do the evaluation over a period of time. So as the technology embarks, Ian and team already has a framework in place that can test and repeat these so that we know the benchmark in a real world setting is going to make sense. So now, what is that difference between the legacy way of stitching stuff together versus the current way? So what we are doing, right? So in the traditional way of doing stuff, we started with, say, automatic speech recognition systems. Once we have that, then the second piece of the puzzle would be a bunch of textual blobs that are coming in. Then the next piece of the puzzle would be, we will have multiple downstream applications that will do extraction based on specialty. We might have embedded or say hard-coded domain-specific languages going in there to understand this means this in a medical context. Now, what we are trying to do with the net new technology underpinning is what we are saying, although we have a humongous corpus, when we say large language models, we are saying it is the entire corpus of the world, right? So it's trained on that. But then now the focus is task specific, getting very specific. And how do we do that? So this is where the concept of reasoning kicks in. This is where techniques like chain of thought, by telling the model to understand just like a doctor would understand in a simple layman term, having that embedded as a part of the workflow, we chop all the heavy lifting that was done in the past, but have these advanced capabilities do that job for us. Then comes the second piece of the puzzle, wherein so far we have been just talking about the word error rate. Now think about a concept called as medical concept word error rate. And then people go from a medical concept word error rate to a, say, medical concept character error rate at a very prescriptive level to see what is happening during these conversations. These net new capabilities, by fine-tuning these large language models to very specific domain, which is healthcare, we are surpassing the traditional way of doing stuff, wherein having multiple NLP job do the same stuff. Now we have a fine-tuned model wherein the learnings from Ian's team can actually adapt a large language model to do that job for us. That's the new way of doing stuff.
I want to respond to a couple things. You mentioned fine-tuning the models. We're seeing enormous gains from fine-tuning your Gemini most recent models. We use it in MetaLM as well. I mean 10-point plus gains. It's a really exciting tooling that makes a difference. And it's valuable for us too, because it allows us to have like a proprietary IP layer. Again, warranting why do we even exist, and there are many reasons why we should exist. Another thing I wanted to add, now that ambient documentation is becoming more prevalent, people are kind of saying, well, why? Okay, we've got these nice HPIs, we've got these nice notes. They're, what is the purpose of it? Like, why does this even exist? And then our health system partners are starting to say, really, can you just give us the structured data, like underpinning that note? Because now that we think about it, that's actually what we really want. We want those entities and that structured data. And then Augmedix, can you help us render that for various purposes? Can you make this clinician version, that clinician version, this discharge output, this patient-facing version? And health systems are starting to realize it's really about that structured data underneath. And I think that kind of touches on some of the tools and capabilities that Sarita mentioned. And we've been working with Google on techniques and frameworks for capturing the structured data underneath the ambient. I'll even paste it in the chat here. We recently released a reference architecture on how we do it so that others can do similarly.
So we're spending a lot of time on kind of ambient listening. I'm curious your thoughts on ambient nudging. How do you see the space? I'm in the moment, and it's not what I documented or what I intended to document, but what should I, or what am I missing? The delta, which we all know, humans are infallible. We can't remember everything, but gosh, when I'm treating a stroke patient, I have to, for stroke guidelines, for all of the quality extraction, document these 3 core pieces and paucity of data. So how do you view the absence of data and the role of an assistive device as opposed to just one that is passively listening?
You're double clicking on the feature of ambient, and also a key differentiator.
Look at that! I'm just double clicking.
For Augmedix. So once you conquer that difficult task of note taking, the next thing that people realize is, okay, you're in the room, Augmedix. You got this technology. It's listening to the conversation. It's producing notes, but you built this pipe into the lives of clinicians and into the point of care. Let's utilize that pipe to do more than just passive listening and documentation. Let's kind of flip it around in the other direction. Let's pipe intelligence back into the room to change behavior and alter things that would otherwise be happening. And I think that's just hugely powerful if you think about it. Now, I think we're all somewhat familiar with the concept that doctors and clinicians can see flags and alerts in their EMR. A doctor might open up their EMR and see 30 flags for this one patient encounter. And I'm pretty sure they'll ignore all 30 of those 30, and they'll hate that whole experience. The beauty of ambient nudges or intelligence is that these can be kind of modulated to what was or wasn't said in the room. So rather than indiscriminately bombarding you with alerts, basically that you already just covered with the patient, it will only sparingly nudge you in a titrated way based on what was or wasn't said at the right time. And so that way you as a clinician view this not as this nag, but actually as your wingman or your co-pilot. And so if you look at our latest versions of Augmedix Go, we're surfacing these sort of gentle ambient reminders and nudges. They're delightful. And another thing you can do is you can just naturally respond to them. You can just say, that doesn't matter, the second one's severe, and then go back to, and it just sort of naturally ingests that and refreshes your note and refreshes your guidance. So I think to kind of rope it in, the one-way ambient documentation experience is increasingly going to be a two-way ambient intelligence experience where we're helping clinicians, remember patient safety related items, operational items, I'm in the ED and I'm seeing someone for a back pain, but probably should ask about a fever, for various reasons. And I did it. And sort of getting these sort of helpful guidance elements in the right moment and the right time is increasingly where we're going. And that requires a lot of really sophisticated modeling capabilities that Sarita has been talking about.
Sarita, I'm going to tie in. We got one question kind of, and you talking about this paper that you're going to or soon to be publishing around kind of the transferability and the scale of these across languages. And actually this one was a question around suggestions around improvement of ambient listening in French. Je ne sais pas. What advice, guidance would you articulate for multilingual?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for the question. So like I said, right, that literature is pushing the boundary of where is that blur line between when we talk about, say, textual manipulation versus, say, ambient listening. So the journey, the manuscript that is in draft right now, like I said, right now we are focusing on UK accent. We are focusing on, say, the African accent, and obviously we have our US English. So the concept is it all ties back to what data sets are publicly available. So based on that, we selected these small subsets to push the boundary of what can be done. Now, how are we solving for? so the two aspects, like I mentioned, right? The multilingual capabilities of these large language models, very specific to the Google Cloud domain. We are doing a side-by-side evaluation of the power of Gemini 1.5 with 2 million token context so that it can take the entire encounter. And then we are leveraging Gemini Flash, which is known for better throughput and latency. So we are taking that as our front line. Then for the post-processing layer, that is where the multilingual and multicultural kicks in. So now what we have is we have different modules that will solve for, say, diarization, that can solve for, say, punctuation, based on the linguistic that we are talking, and then training the model using the chain of thoughts technique to solve for that. Right now, for the 3 data sets that we have mentioned, we see a great, I would say, the benchmark that we are receiving with respect to the word error rate, the medical concept word error rate, and the medical concept character word error rate. We are seeing the number going down, and down is better with respect to how LLMs can help you solve for accuracy and efficacy for the multicultural data sets.
There's a question again, and maybe for Ian, how do you see kind of working with global or national agencies? So this was a question around interesting members of the UNFD. I won't do it. I had to Google. So WHO, AI, task force, community, and stuff. How do you feel like? What's your responsibility and kind of interface with national or global bodies as we kind of go down this brave new world and think about standards and sharing and disseminating best practices?
Yeah, thus far, Augmedix has been very focused on the U.S. market, and we have to pay a lot of attention to HIPAA and by state rules around audio, video, and recording capabilities, and of course, notices to patients. So one of the things we do in all of our sites, operational sites, if you're a patient, you're seeing a doctor that uses Augmedix, you'll always be notified at the front desk. Your clinician uses Augmedix, here's the benefits, questions or concerns. It can come off, and here's how it works. And so we're really buttoned up and adhering to all of those sort of domestic oversight issues. We've yet to really go international. So I can't really comment on that as of yet. I know others are pursuing ambient and international markets, and actually one of the reasons why we historically haven't is because of ASR limitations. What we're seeing in the last 6 months is precisely what Sarita is mentioning. These new LLM infused ASR techniques kind of completely knock down the language barrier and the sort of front end transcription diarization barriers. So we are starting to take sales and go to market initiatives internationally. So hopefully we'll have more to report soon. So that's enabled by some of these new ASR techniques.
And that ties into kind of one of the questions of accents. And although you might be U.S. focused, I assure you the accents and we are very much an unbelievably diverse community in the medical space. And so, I'm sure you are solving these problems that will then also be ultimately transferable to.
Well, we need to do this anyway for the U.S. I think like 5% or so of clinician-patient conversations in the U.S. are, in foreign language or Spanish or Spanglish or something like that. And up until 1 or 2 years ago, we've just excluded those environments from the Augmedix service. Actually, now we no longer exclude because of these multilingual ASR capabilities. We can start to serve those areas as well.
It's super fascinating. So, and actually maybe for Sarita, you touched on kind of the multimodal. And so not only are you opening the aperture to capabilities of voice and the audio experience, but now there's a visual experience. And I'm just curious, from a technology perspective, the convergence, are they not converged? Like, what are you seeing around kind of these blurring that Ian kind of talked to? I can talk about it, but I can also take a picture. I can understand the situation. Here's the rash. True ambient, not listening, but ambient in the room multi sensory experience.
Yeah, so on this, right? So variety of use cases come to mind, but then when we speak about multimodal, at this point in time, we all agree, people who are living and breathing in the industry like healthcare, we are talking about multimodal data set. And then you were asking Ian about the question, right? How does it all tie together? Is it just a one-way door or is it bidirectional in nature? At the end of the day, it's all about the longitudinal patient journey. A data set that is consistent, it starts all the way from unstructured text to say the voice, the audio, the wave file kicking in, and then we might have images coming in all over the place together. That's that patient overview. We call it as, you can call it as patient 360. In technology term, we can say that's the underpinning data strategy that allows us to see a holistic patient view in the form of these data sets. So the way we are seeing this right now is, let's take HCA as a perfect example, right? So the approach that we have is like, we have these wave files coming in, wherein we have the end result of that is, say, a summarized textual response. After we go through the whole 9 yards of, say, from the point it was a provider and a patient conversation to grabbing those insights and have a summarized result. Now, this summarized result can actually act as a feature or an input data set that complements the existing data layer that can solve for multiple downstream AI use cases. Maybe it's a use case that has to do with, say, propensity modeling for, say, X number of patients with X number of conditions. Or maybe it's a use case that solves for, say, search for a specific condition based on the criteria that I put in, so that for a patient or for a provider, they are able to find the right information associated with that patient at a fingertip. So the way I see this is, it all comes back together as a 360-degree overview, which is multimodal in nature, and then opens up the floodgate for a variety of use cases that can be enabled using the power of Google Cloud.
Love it. Ian, I'm curious, other caregivers. So yes, so physicians are important and advanced practice providers, but I think about our busy nursing colleagues as the true unsung or sung heroes. I mean, they're the ones literally at the bedside, probably the most attuned and engaged with the patient, but yet if you watch a nurse, they're living in what I call the world's worst Sudoku, the doc flow sheet of typing away a bunch of meaningless boxes. And you have to think that voice experience and kind of that interaction would be unbelievably ripe for that caregiver. I'm curious, your reflections as someone who lived in the space for decades, how do you view nursing in that whole space?
Yeah, not a week goes by where a chief nursing information officer doesn't reach out to us and ask about Ambient for nursing. And the short answer is we're working on it. Stay tuned. You mentioned that there are 40 plus competitors in this space, which is crazy. But so far as I can tell, none of them are really focused on the nursing application. They're mostly focused on physicians, which is really a tragedy. And you have to ask yourself, why is that?
Yeah.
The first reason is, I think until COVID, let's just call it like it is. All of the tools and innovation was going to the physicians and not as much the nurses, and that's a big problem. And it was a big wake up call, I think, to the industry when we realized how important nurses are, their efficiency is their bottleneck. And I think now, today in 2024, post pandemic, there's a much greater realization that we really have to work on nursing burnout, nursing efficiencies, tools, and innovation for them. And so the floodgates are open for that to happen now, finally. I think that the second biggest barrier to doing Ambient for nursing is their documentation schema is way more complicated than, say, a doctor. So a doctor, has these big sections of a note, they need to fill them out, you're done. If you look at what a nurse has to do, it's a complicated, never-ending flow sheet with all kinds of little discrete fields and cookies and things like that. So the level of sort of discrete out of ambient precision is actually much higher than would be required for a typical doctor ambulatory situation, as well as the nurse and their sort of voice UI UX paradigm will need to oscillate more between multi-party with patient versus single party summarization, which is kind of a new UX paradigm. So I'm just telling you some of the challenges, why it's not done yet.
Yep.
But the good news is we're actively working on it. In the coming quarters, our plan is to launch more acute care nursing pilots, and stay tuned. And I think this is a huge need, and will be a huge impact to healthcare if we can bring the world of ambient to nursing.
And then maybe just continuing on that riff, we've got providers, you've got the nursing, all of the ancillary providers, but then the most important is the patient. I'm curious, kind of, Sarita, I treat that like a translation, right? In this case, English to French, but you're going from physician speak to patient-friendly terms that are at the appropriate, medical level, and in terms of healthcare literacy and accessibility. Curious thoughts on that, either Ian or Sarita. Is that to me a translation problem or opportunity? Or it's a hot button. We're like, it's a tough one. Curious as we think of summarization, it's not just summarizing, but summarizing it through, say, the vein of making sure it's healthcare literate. And I'm deciphering.
I'm going to kind of obliquely answer your question. 5 years ago, it was controversial for a doctor to even share their note with their patient, right? And then there was this, at the time, considered edgy movement to open notes, which caused like a minor heart attack to many clinicians.
Good.
And now, I think that's kind of the norm. Increasingly, clinicians are expected to reveal their notes transparently, and it's now seen that that's actually a great positive. It does kind of put the burden on the clinician now to do your notes and do them well, because guess what? They're going to go on to these other cases. Hence, that drives use of Augmedix, which I'm happy about. But I think that's just the beginning. Like now, if we can, as I mentioned earlier, render the structured data in the notes for not only patients, but patients' family members and caregivers to kind of improve their care and understand. I think the power of LLMs is very much enabling to do that precisely. So, yeah.
And I'll add some color to that, right? So the reason it's a tricky question, because the field is evolving. So when we talk about showing these notes to patient, there's a concept of the tone. One is the accuracy from the medical domain perspective. Then the second piece is the empathy. It should feel like it's a natural thing, just like we are having a conversation right now. So that ties back to the response that I gave you in the second question, wherein when we talk about evaluating, right now we are pushing the boundaries of these net new innovation that is happening in the science and the computer domain. But then the framework, the evaluation framework, at this point in time with our customers, it's a combination of clinical experts in the room. It's a combination of doctors sitting in the room. One of the factors in the evaluation matrix, it's not just the accuracy, it's not just the recall, it is also the tone of the note, it is also the empathy. And that together gives us an index of how good the final output is, so that is a shareable asset when we say, now I'm focusing on releasing this note to a patient. So that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, no, I think the measurement framework is important, because someone pointed this out in the chat, is there's hallucination. It's not a bug, it's a feature of these things, and there is a degree of just mathematical probabilities hallucinations. And so I would imagine kind of that framework and rubric to say, there'll be no hallucinations is a fool's errand, but having a rubric and a means to kind of measure and know where you are is just prudent, smart, and for those from within the DC area, I see White House. That's something that is very much we are in complete support of. Is giving agency to those who are using these tools, and not turning on something that brings harm. In the last 30 seconds, each of you, what are you most excited about? What do you think is like white hot, that, or maybe you don't know the answer, but like the speed and the pace, it feels frenetic and exciting. Give us, through your lens, what is like, holy smokes, this is the best time to be in healthcare IT in the world?
Dang. I think what we talked about earlier, the bidirectional ambient intelligence. Think about ambient everywhere. I think this is not 5 years out, not 2 years out. The time is now for that, and it's going to change the healthcare experience for the provider and especially the patient. That's the real revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Sarita?
For me, because in this conversation so far, I have been adding the lens of a research. I want to see research in action at scale. That's what keeps me up and rolling. So the moment we push the boundaries, taking it as a product, as an application that is deployable across the horizon, I think that is what keeps me rolling. So yeah, that's what I'm excited about.
Well, I know we're coming up on time, so I want to be respectful. Again, Ian, Sarita, you are unbelievable partners, unbelievably smart, but your ability to translate something that's very, very complex to us mere mortals is super appreciative. So I sincerely thank you. As a physician, this is why we went into medicine, is to ultimately bring these unbelievable capabilities at scale to patients and better that empathetic. Sarita used the word empathy. This is not about technology, this is empathy. And so I applaud you. I thank you sincerely on behalf of the community and elevating and giving us your time. We've got 3 more camp sessions, if you will, shifting gears from a little bit more esoteric, digital pathology. And if you have no idea what that is, then this is the camp session for you, because I don't have a lot of ideas about what digital pathology is or not. There's going to be no gory pictures, so this is not going to be like CSI, I assure you, I think. But it'll be a fascinating take on this new emerging space that everyone knows radiology. Well, what about those other visual subspecialties? And pathology is certainly one of them. Then we will shift gears back to radiology, and be some really exciting sessions on pragmatic use cases that are out live touching patients. And then we'll geek out at the end around research. But I thank you. We will send out, please, this is about a community, not about a one and done. So reach out, give feedback, and as all, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.